Eh, bueno, pues estamos ya en directo emitiendo en el canal de YouTube la tercera de las sesiones que tenemos del curso sobre decrecimiento y ecofeminismos. Y hoy contamos con la presencia de una invitada de lejos, conceptualmente y geográficamente, ¿no? De la Universidad de Granada, donde hemos estado desarrollando las sesiones anteriores, ¿vale? Que es la investigadora Ekaterina Sherkovskaya de la Universidad de Lund. En primer lugar, quiero agradecer a Ekaterina que esté hoy aquí. Es un viejo encuentro que hemos intentado hacer durante mucho tiempo. We have been trying to keep in contact and just have a meeting in any moment in this time. So it is a very pleasure for me that you will be here today, because we have making a discussion, being in contact for a long time in the previous years, really. So I hope that the next one will be not live. No, it will be in Granada maybe in the future, so the forthcoming, maybe the next year. So very happy for you, that you will be here today. Bueno, Ekaterina, voy a empezar solo 2 minutos en presentarla. Es investigadora, coordinadora de proyectos en la Universidad de Lund, su doctorado en ecología humana por la Universidad de Lund en el 2018, su máster, perdón, y su formación doctoral por la Rebound University en el año 2003, ¿no? Ha estado trabajando durante mucho tiempo, del año 2017 al año 2020, en el proyecto Horizonte 2020, en el Reinvent, sobre decarbonización de plástico, papel, metal y otro tipo de elementos. Y por no extenderme mucho, también fue organizadora de la 6ª Conferencia Internacional sobre Decrecimiento para la Economía, para la Sustentabilidad Ecológica y la Equidad Social en Malmö en el año 2018. Recientemente ha publicado, si visitáis su página web, la Universidad de Lund, tiene muchas publicaciones y hay algunas muy recientes del año 2021, Countering Corporate Violence, The Grow, Ecosocialism Organizing Beyond the Destructive Force of Capitalism, con la colaboración de Paulson, del profesor Paulson, y otra que es On the Destructive Force of Capitalist Mode of Production, or How to Counter Corporate Violence with the Growth. No me voy a extender más, simplemente agradecer a Caterina, agradecer a Victoria Aragón, que también ha podido entrar a la sesión, disculpar por el retraso que ha habido de unos minutos en iniciar la emisión en directo por un problema técnico con la plataforma Zoom. Y Ekaterina, thank you for being here, cuando tú quieras.
Hola a todos, muchas gracias por la introducción, Antonio. Entiendo casi todo, pero creo que mi lección va a ser en inglés. Mi castellano no es tan bueno para hablar mucho, pero sí, es mi placer estar aquí. So now, yes, I will share the screen, and it would be, I don't have the hosting rights yet, so if someone could give them to me, that would be nice. So because I have some slides that I would be going through. So now it says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Can you share the screen?
No, it says host disabled participant screen sharing. So, and I think I need to become a co-host maybe to be able to share. I'm happy to talk without, or to start without the slides also.
You can send me by email if you want. So you have an environment, I can share the screen.
Okay, let's do it this way. Yes, so I hope it is kind of quite a large file. So now it's attaching, and I hope that I should be able to send it to you.
So you send to email?
So yes, I have sent it to your email now.
Okay.
If you want, I can start without the slides
Yes,
also, and then
yeah.
you can just open them. Okay, now it says delivery has failed because the file is quite large. So I think that the email wouldn't allow such a large file to be sent. So I think that probably the best solution with Zoom is either to make me able to share the screen, or if you want, we can just do without the slides, but they're kind of colorful, so. What do you think?
So you prefer you can start just now when I will receive your presentation, I will share with as you will share the screen, just okay?
Yeah. So, okay, so I will start, and whenever I can share the screen, you let me know, and then I will share it. Okay?
Okay.
Good. So okay, for now, without the slides, yes, once again, thanks, Antonia, for this nice introduction into the different things that I have been doing, and it's my pleasure to talk about degrowth to you today. So basically, my plan for today is to talk for about an hour or something like this, and then to have a discussion afterwards with everyone present. And basically, my idea is to introduce degrowth as a research area, as kind of a small social movement, and also to discuss like the emerging discussions, let's say, within degrowth, because very much I would say that my key research is on degrowth, and I also see myself as part of the international degrowth movement. So, but to start with, so whenever discussing degrowth, we have to kind of bring in growth into the picture. And basically, the issue with growth is that it is so omnipresent. So, I mean, economic growth in particular. So, for example, if you look at different kinds of goals or frameworks, such as sustainable development goals, you will see that that particular one, it has 7 different goals, including climate action or gender equality and others, but also economic growth is one of them. So it is goal number 8 within sustainable development goals. So, and I can actually see that I can share my screen now. Hooray! So that's good. And you should be able to see the screen now also. Yes. So basically this goal number 8 already has economic growth there. We don't really know why it's there, but it really shows how growth is so present in discussions around economy and society. And economists often call for kind of around 3% compound growth rate per year globally, which, however, has many problems, as I will unpack. So if we look at this now almost classic article by Stefan and colleagues from 2015, So we can see the period from the 1950s that has been termed the Great Acceleration, where growth is really going very fast, and at the same time, this growth is very much coupled with increasing carbon dioxide emissions, energy use, acidification, and many other parameters. So this work has been one of the important contributions in showing how this very rapid growth over the second half of the 20th century and until now has been going in line with increased use of energy, materials, and hence increased environmental pressures. So, and this discussion is something that not only degrowthers are bringing the attention to. So there are different voices, I would say, that are very much problematizing growth. So for example, within the climate movement, people like Greta Thunberg, an activist from Sweden, has been very much, it has been part of her critique of politicians in terms of always speaking about the fairy tales of eternal economic growth, but not really doing much when it comes to climate action. Or scholars like Johan Rockström, who has been behind this framework of planetary boundaries, which I'm sure many of you will be familiar with. So he also actually has been advocating the idea of green growth before, but it seems that at least in some of his kind of public interviews more recently, he has been saying, okay, perhaps this idea of green growth is wishful thinking, and this is not something that policies should be based on. And there are also examples of some organizations, for example, the European Environmental Agency or Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity, that have been also bringing up this issue of growth as coming always together with environmental degradation. So, and I would say also that among many working on environmental issues and perhaps on climate in particular, so the problem with growth has been spotted, like in this article that I'm citing here, which was signed by 11,000 scientists, and where also kind of one of the issues to do to address climate change was to go away from the idea of eternal economic growth. But in this discussion, what is important is that, okay, it doesn't, so kind of recognizing that growth comes with environmental degradation, it doesn't, it comes from the more ecological sustainability, let's say, discussion. But then if it is to be addressed, this can be done in different ways, including some very unjust and problematic ways. So, and when it comes to degrowth, which I will now start introducing, it is very much the idea that ecological sustainability and social justice should come together. So it is not only about problematizing growth, but it is about reorganization of society's economy and economies on the principles of ecological sustainability and social justice. So, and one definition of degrowth can be that, okay, it is this umbrella term that critiques the centrality of economic growth in contemporary societies and embraces alternatives for ecological sustainability, social justice, and human flourishing. Degrowth as a name, as a term, appeared in 1972, and it was coined by André Gortz, a French intellectual, who was inspired by the Limits to Growth reports that came out that very year. So, and it is later on that degrowth was translated into English, and degrowth as a term is more associated with the international degrowth conferences that started from 2008, but the discussion started already earlier. And now the kind of international scholarly activist movement very much connects to the term degrowth. So, but then the kind of definition that I gave to you, so in what it means for us who are advocating for degrowth, is that this means that material and energy throughput should decrease in absolute terms, whilst ensuring well-being for all. So again, this agenda of ecological sustainability and social justice, it comes together in the way degrowth is introduced. And as I have now mentioned already, so since around 2008, it is a research area and the social movement, but also it really was inspired. So this kind of research area was inspired by activism that was happening in France in early 2000s, in places like Lyon, and then it was going to other spaces, including Spain and Italy. So visualizations using artistic means are often helpful to kind of articulate something that perhaps is not so easy to describe with words. So, and it is important to emphasize that degrowth, it is not about having like economies with less of the same. So it is not recession. So, and it is not, it is something completely different that degrowth argues for. So going completely away from this kind of economies which are oriented at constant growth and accumulation and organizing on different principles. And as you can see, a snail is kind of a creature that has often been drawn on to somehow to depict degrowth. So when speaking of degrowth, so as critique of growth is so central to it, it is important to unpack like the different levels of this critique. So this is something that I will do now. And these three levels can be said, okay, it's economic critique of growth, ecological critique of growth, and socio-cultural critique of growth. So the economic critique is that perpetual growth is not possible. And the very idea from a degrowth stance that 3% growth can be kind of is desirable and can be achieved like eternally seems quite absurd. And also different people who have been working on degrowth as well as on the history of growth have been stressing how growth is very much kind of an idea that appeared in the well, that was very much pushed in the second half of the 20th century. So it has a relatively short history, but it is so hard to kind of question it today. So then from a degrowth stance, of course, also there is a critique of GDP as this key measure that is used by states all over the world. So it is just an inadequate measure of well-being. GDP includes, so it is a monetary measure and basically a lot of actions that are very problematic and degrading, say, for the environment, they can be contributing to GDP. And at the same time, GDP does not include a lot of activities that are important for us, so such as those happening outside the monetized economy, like care, but GDP simply is kind of not including them in any way. And actually it's quite interesting because the founder of GDP, Simon Kuznets, he came up with this kind of, well, the predecessor of this indicator in the times of the Great Depression in the US. And the idea was to see how the US economy was doing in times of crisis. And then it was also used during the Second World War. But Kuznets was very explicit that GDP was not a measure of well-being or welfare, and was actually quite critical about how important this indicator became for different countries afterwards, and perhaps went beyond what Kuznets was originally thinking when designing this measure. So then when it comes to ecological critique, the short message, also something that already was shown in the graphs that I shared with you earlier, so is that growth leads to ecological degradation, and I will unpack this message in a bit. So, and the third kind of the growth critique of growth centrism is that is sociocultural. So growth is based on injustices, is one point to be made in this discussion. So, and these are injustices between the global north and the global south. And these are also injustices within societies based on class, race, gender, and so on. So, and then another point is that, okay, the very kind of idea of what good life is today very much connected to growth, to money, to jobs. So, but actually good life can be conceived differently, and this perpetual economic growth is not what is needed to ensure good life for all. And then, of course, the kind of pursuit of growth comes with also particular kind of cultural ideas, such as workerism, so the centrality of work in defining people within societies and in positioning them within societies, even if very few of us are actually lucky to have the work that we really love and that we also paid for it. So, or consumerism or acceleration. So these are all kind of part and parcel of growth-centric societies. So now here is the moment to stop a bit on this connection of growth with environmental degradation. So, or why decoupling is not possible, because the problem with the growth leading to environmental degradation has been recognized in different discussions, and also including the more mainstream discussions. But the kind of more mainstream response, such as the one that you can see in Sustainable Development Goals, is that, green growth, or kind of new ways to stimulate growth, can lead to economic growth without environmental degradation. So, and scholars who work within the research area of degrowth have been arguing that, okay, actually, there is no empirical evidence that growth can be decoupled from environmental degradation. So any examples where growth has been happening while without the pressure on environment, or kind of, so it has been happening usually during either a very short period of time or within a very confined space. So say Scandinavian countries, so like Sweden, where I am speaking from and where I live, has been praised for kind of having achieved this decoupling. But actually the economies of Sweden, as well as other Scandinavian countries, are very much relying on the environmental pressures in other countries. So, and on the global scale, there has been no evidence that green growth is possible, and there is actually no reason to base the policies on the hypothesis that it might happen. So often a lot of kind of hope is put in the service or digital economy, so that this is something which has less of a material throughput, but will lead to growth. But actually, again, there are different sources from research and also beyond, like this SHIFT project, that show the very serious material throughput associated with the digital and service economies. So, for example, using all the technology that we have been using much more during the pandemic, of course, it allows us to kind of travel less. But at the same time, also it needs to be maintained by the kind of servers, data centers, and things like this. So, and this throughput is not insignificant and is on the rise. So then the ecological economists and degrowthers, also being inspired by them, have been very much drawing attention to the so-called called rebound effects. So when something becomes more efficient, so say a production of a car becomes more efficient, then the person who is using it tends to use it more and to go for larger distances or at higher speeds because this car kind of has better efficiency. Or, of course, the companies also, if they produce more efficient cars, then they again want to produce more of these cars and grow their production. So in that sense, efficiency is something also in which a lot of hope has been put from the advocates of green growth, but then it usually leads to higher production and higher consumption. So then there is some discussion of kind of breakthrough technologies, such as carbon capture and storage or use, or bioeconomy with carbon capture and storage. So which are, on the one hand, kind of currently not viable, so they're not operating at the scales that would be needed to actually make a big cut in emissions. But from what is very important from a degrowth stance is that they are also ethically problematic, because they can be coming with environmental injustices and being implemented in the spaces where people live and where people do not want these technologies to be kind of shaping their landscapes. And also they require kind of hierarchical control. And also, even if they can be designed kind of as breakthrough, then due to, say, seismic activity, there can be leakage of carbon that they are capturing, or things like this. So also this is not kind of the way to go for the future. Then renewable energy is, of course, important, and transition towards renewable energy is desirable from a degrowth stance, but then the kind of the same level of production and consumption as what we have with fossil energy is not really achievable with renewable energy because of its kind of different level of efficiency, let's say, and also because of the space that it requires. So this is the kind of, I would say, I have been trying to sum up here the key discussions around the problematics of decoupling in relation to economic growth. So, and now very briefly, so again, degrowth is not just about problematizing green growth and problematizing the environmental degradation that comes with the pursuit of growth, but is also very much the argument that injustices are inherent to the pursuit of growth, and also arguably violence. So this article that we have recently written with Alexander Paulson that Antonio mentioned in the introduction. So there we actually argue that growth comes together with violence, and capital accumulation also comes together with violence. So, and some examples here, I'm sure many of you will be familiar with Environmental Justice Atlas, which maps conflicts all over the world, which are very much associated with kind of the pursuit of growth and capital accumulation. So, or also on the left-hand side, you kind of can see a graph that demonstrates who benefits from global GDP growth. And actually, we have seen rising inequalities across the world, as work of scholars such as Thomas Piketty has shown. And on this particular graph, what Jason Hickel wanted to show is that kind of since 1980, it's actually the richest 1% who have been capturing most of the GDP growth, while it has not been kind of trickling down in the way it is usually expected in economic thinking. So now to degrowth alternatives. So in degrowth, we talk about limits, so environmental limits, so for example, the planetary boundaries, but also kind of ethical and social limits that we as societies should collectively decide on in terms of what is needed to live well and what is needed not to live at someone else's expense. So, but at the same time, with living with limits can can come with unlimited well-being. So in degrowth, we very much kind of try to rethink what well-being means and connect it not just with pursuit of material, let's say, possessions, but with other things that make life important. So there is often the discussion of need satisfaction, drawing on Max Neef's work, for example, kind of arguing that, okay, it is not only about having, but also doing and being. It is a way to conceive well-being within degrowth, but also similar thoughts on well-being has been kind of taking place in different spaces around the world. So colleagues from Finland have been working with this framework on having, doing, loving, and being as a way to understand well-being, which is not connected simply to kind of pursuing growth. So then within degrowth, values like mutual aid, care, solidarity, conviviality, and direct democracy are emphasized. I could, of course, go on longer with this list, but I think it gives you an idea of what kinds of values a degrowth alternative shares. So, and then degrowth is also about rethinking the economy, so, and how economy would look like. So, and here we usually discuss the open relocalization of economy. So the idea is that, okay, a lot of things can be produced much closer to where we live, and global trade is very much very unjust and based on unequal exchange and unequal ecological exchange. But then also the key in discussing relocalization is that adjective of open, because it is not about societies kind of closing in themselves and just producing for themselves and not being in touch with others. So it is about very interconnected societies based on solidarity and on openness within them, but also openness to the world. So when it comes to the different organizational forms discussed within degrowth, I mean, a lot of things in degrowth is really an emerging and ongoing discussion. But of course, the kind of for-profit organizations or corporations, so they are key to the pursuit of growth, and they are problematic from a degrowth stance. So then often the organizational forms that are emphasized would be not-for-profit, kind of smaller scale, and community and cooperative that have community cooperative organizational, let's say, structures. So, and then the whole idea of degrowth transformation is that it is bottom-up and grassroots, but then implemented on different levels. So within the degrowth discussion, the idea is that it is important to try and stimulate change not only locally, but also at kind of regional, national, and supranational levels, because very much the policies and institutions that exist in today's societies and economies shape a lot what the what can be done, let's say, at the local level, and what cannot be done at the local level. So when speaking about degrowth as an alternative, it is important to stress that, okay, it is an alternative rather than the alternative. So, and degrowth is part of larger efforts for socio-ecological transformation that can be found in many spaces around the world. So there is the very connected discussion of pluriverse, and there was a nice book that came out a couple of years ago that also has been translated into Spanish, Pluriverse, a post-development dictionary, which kind of brings together these different alternatives, which are alternatives to growth and alternatives to development. And degrowth is one of them, but not the only one. So there is very much in degrowth discussion this awareness that degrowth stems from the context well, the European context and the global North context. So what is discussed within degrowth is in dialogue, let's say, with many other concepts that exist in other spaces. So such as ecological Swaraj in India, or when we were in Ecuador and Bolivia and others. So, and for degrowth itself, so kind of the idea is to be in connection to all those other alternatives and to be part of a larger effort, but also within degrowth itself, multiplicity is at the core, and multiplicity is important. So degrowth is informed by various theoretical traditions, for example, can be from Marxism, anarchism, ecofeminism, and others. So there is no single way, let's say, to approach degrowth and to talk about degrowth, and there has been so far this avoidance of creating a particular dogma, let's say, of what degrowth is or is not. But of course, the way what I have described to you in terms of kind of a broad vision of what degrowth is as a problem and what the alternatives are, so they are shared across this multiplicity within degrowth. So when kind of conceptually introducing degrowth as an alternative, often a comment can be, okay, but it all sounds very good, but isn't it somewhat utopian? So then within the degrowth discussion, there is also the emphasis on actually making a point that there are already many alternatives out there, that this kind of values that are discussed in degrowth, they are not something kind of made up and not existent, but something based on which a lot of groups and organizations already work today. So now I will just give you a couple of those. So say cooperative and community renewable energy is already very much flourishing in different spaces. So say there is this network that you can see the map of on the left of the slide. So it is ResCoops, then a network of renewable energy cooperatives in Europe, and together there are now close to 2,000 of them. So they are kind of small scale and operating in the spaces where they are, but united in a larger network, they can do things together, from exchanging knowledge to kind of trying to push for support of this kind of energy initiatives at more policy levels. And also in this particular network, you do not have so much, for example, the Baltic countries, or but actually there are also similar initiatives that do exist in those spaces. So then probably many of you would know various alternative food networks, and I would say that, okay, wherever we are, we can find some direct kind of direct ways to sell things from the farmers to the people, or some kind of solidarity initiatives around farming, around food waste, community supported agriculture, and things like this. So and also wherever you are, so the kind of larger players, larger organizations, companies, they would very much be bringing stuff from very far across the world, and you would not even know that, say, in Sweden, you have quite a lot of local produce and quite a lot of small-scale farmers already building an alternative. So then there are these interesting models of design global, manufacture local, so which are very much based on the idea of digital commons and kind of exchange of knowledge and building knowledge together digitally, which can then be enabling, for example, manufacturing locally. So it's Vasilis Kostakis and colleagues who have been very much pursuing this work, and they have interesting examples of, say, producing wind turbines, drawing on this open designs available globally, but then being able to use them to kind of adapt for the local production in the spaces where people are based. Or I have been also kind of doing research around plastics, also something that Antonio mentioned at the beginning when introducing me. And also there are some kind of alternatives like precious plastics, which design these machines that enable plastic recycling locally. So, and then people with kind of the appropriate skills can use these designs to build the machines in the spaces where they are. And it is a very vibrant network that Precious Plastic has created. So, and there are various other initiatives out there. So, and of course, when also talking from degrowth stances, it is important to kind of pay attention and visibilize the many initiatives that already exist outside the monetized economy, such as time banks, bike kitchens, repair cafes, and others. So, which do something important and a part of economic, let's say, activity, but take it away from the market and from monetary transactions. So then degrowth is very much kind of well, a research area and a particular vision of socio-ecological transformation. But then also, even if different people would probably have different stances on this, but it can be said that degrowth is a social movement also. It is quite a small movement if you can, if you compare it with, for example, environmental justice or climate justice movements, but there is something that unites the kind of different agents and people who are part of the degrowth discussion. So, and the movement is very much, so the international movement very much connects to international degrowth conferences that happen once in 2 years, even if more recently there have been also more conferences happening. So, for example, this year there was a conference, digital conference, which was hosted by people based in Manchester, and there was another conference that was hosted by people based in the Hague. And there are various kind of local and regional groups that are involved in organizing the conferences, and usually when there is an emerging interest in degrowth, such a conference would happen, which would further then strengthen the kind of discussion on degrowth and the interest to degrowth in this context. So, for example, in 2018, after some years of kind of discussion of degrowth in the Swedish context or in the southern Swedish context, we organized a conference in Malmö, which was also an important space for kind of drawing more attention to the kinds of issues degrowth is bringing up. And also now we continue as a group to be active locally in various ways. So then, of course, this degrowth as a movement has also been very much kind of academic, connected to academia, but then also trying to go as much as possible beyond it, and being very much entangled with activism. So degrowth summer schools have sometimes been part of climate camps, but also there are more kind of, let's say, formal educational programs in connection to degrowth that have been opened, and most notably the 2 master's programs that are connected with the ICTA in Barcelona. So, and then within so degrowth is kind of a small but also a loose movement, and there is no like particular, let's say, structure currently for the movement, even if we do have a discussion internally that this might be something to think about, and we should find ways to organize better. But it has also been very key to kind of build alliances with other movements, other kind of concepts that are connected to degrowth or other critical traditions and scholars. And very much this kind of awareness of degrowth coming from the north is informing, let's say, the positioning of degrowthers and the discussion. So the idea is that north-south bridges should be built and should be built on equal footing, as Corinna Dengler and Lisa Seebacher have been arguing. So, and then I would say that there are two kind of important emerging discussions. There are more than two, of course, and many kind of discussions are emerging around degrowth. But kind of after a decade, at least, of defining very much what degrowth is and trying to kind of advance research on degrowth, there has been this awareness that, okay, there are many important, well, there is a vision, there are ideas of what alternatives look like, but then it's how to make them happen is a big question. And then I would say that the agenda of kind of somehow trying to engage with policy making or trying to push policy making is one of the issues that is emerging in the degrowth discussion. And another one is how to build strategies for degrowth and socio-ecological transformation more generally. So, and I will now speak a little bit about each of those, but also maybe one thing to highlight before I do this is that it is important kind of within degrowth and in view of its multiplicity to keep this internal reflection and kind of self-criticality when trying to engage with policies or when trying to build strategies. So this is something we have been arguing with Stefania Barca and Alexander Paulsen in the introduction to our book, Towards the Political Economy of Degrowth. And what we called it a nomadic utopianism approach to degrowth. So it is important to be kind of brave and to try and make a difference at various levels of policy and governance, and to not shy away from difficult questions such as building a strategy. But at the same time, the kind of actions like this can come with particular closures that can compromise, let's say, the multiplicity that many so much cherish within degrowth. So then being kind of self-critical and self-reflective is something key for, let's say, the subjectivity of degrowth and the steps that we as a movement are taking. So now a little bit on policy making. There has been, so perhaps the starting point for this discussion have been some policy proposals that have been formulated. So the kinds of policy proposals that could foster the alternatives that degrowth has been discussing. And there are many and of different kinds. So, but for example, several common policy proposals that would be mentioned in relation to degrowth would relate to work, so such as shorter working hours, or such as connected policy of, well, of basic income that would allow people to kind of have security in their lives, and then deciding how, what to do with this and how to organize their life. Or some discuss kind of the ideas, related ideas of unconditional autonomy allowance and things like this. So, but then degrowth is not about only supporting the kind of, let's say, alternatives, but it is also about very much addressing the big, powerful and polluting companies out there, so, or addressing those who hold the resources and addressing the reach of the world. So maximum income, for example, has been discussed also in degrowth as much as basic income. So many policies relate to, to kind of ownership or to money, or to work. But also I would say that even if some proposals like shorter working week are kind of discussed quite a lot, but then it is also important to note that the devil is always in the details, and it's not that like a particular policy will will apply to any context, and it's very much matters how this policy is introduced and on which terms. So then when it comes to kind of particular spaces that these ideas around alternative policies have been, that degrowthers have been trying to reach with these alternative ideas and policies. So these are spaces such as the European Parliament and European institutions of the European Union. So for example, there was a conference on post-growth at the EU Parliament in September 2018, which was quite remarkable in terms of at least bringing the term, not degrowth, but post-growth within that context. And also in association with this conference, there was a collective petition to the EU, kind of arguing that there should be a more emphasis on well-being rather than growth. So, and there was a petition that was signed by many people, more than I think 200 scholars, and that was also some sort of a coalition between different, not only degrowthers, but also various critics of growth, and even those maybe who connect to other terms than degrowth. So, or in 2020, there was a collective response very much coordinated by the different kind of people who are part of the degrowth movement. There was a collective response to COVID-19 pandemic and kind of an open letter with the 5, I think, key points in terms of how this very difficult moment can be kind of engaged with from a degrowth stance, and how what kinds of changes will need to address this and other crises. So then also some degrowthers have been kind of joining other coalitions around where policy proposals have been formulated. For example, the Green New Deal for Europe is the most kind of degrowth connected Green New Deal out there, because usually Green New Deals are quite ambiguous about growth. And then also they often are not so careful about issues or so engaged with issues of environmental justice. And Green New Deal for Europe is probably a notable exception where growth is problematized, and also environmental justice is very much at the forefront of this Green New Deal. It was coordinated by DiEM25, but then various groups and scholars and others were involved in kind of putting it together. So including some degrowthers, and I have also been part of this broader coalition. So unfortunately, however, even if Green New Deal for Europe is quite an extensive frame with very concrete policy proposals, like more than 80 that could apply to the European context, then the European Commission is pushing something quite different. So it's pushing the European Green Deal, which is more, well, slightly reformed business as usual, I would say, and which is still very much driven by the various corporate lobbying that exists at the level of the European institutions. But anyway, these are kind of some examples of trying to figure out what kinds of policies could be formulated to foster ideas around degrowth, and also which are the spaces that can be tackled with these ideas. So now another emerging big discussion is on strategies and building strategies. So one can probably say that it emerged around 2018. So when we actually organized the Malmo conference, and some of the participants who came to the conference had this reflection that the growth discussion has been very burgeoning, with many issues addressed and with lots of kind of clarification about what degrowth is and so on. And that there is a very clear vision of what degrowth is about, or even if this is a multiplicity, also this vision. So, and there are ideas of policies, there are ideas of the different kind of initiatives that can be seen as connected to degrowth, but then, okay, how do this vision and the various agents who are part of it, how they can actually be, how they can pursue socio-ecological transformation. So, and as a result of this, the discussion on strategy was started. So, and by strategies, one can understand deliberate and intentional actions to produce socio-ecological, desirable socio-ecological transformation. So, and this kind of strategy discussion very much addresses this difficult how question. And again, kind of in relation to the discussion on nomadic utopianism, or the concept of nomadic utopianism that I mentioned earlier, it is important to think that, okay, it's not about trying to derive some master strategy for degrowth, but really it is about kind of plural and context sensitive strategies that we are talking about. So, and I will not be going into the detail, kind of giving you the contours of strategy discussion in degrowth, because this is really another big topic, but I will give you maybe some kind of highlights of what we are currently doing and where we currently are. So this discussion that kind of was called for in 2018 then resulted in the team of people based in Vienna organizing a conference on degrowth and strategy specifically, and it was held digitally because of the pandemic. So this conference attracted, I think, more than 4,000 people online, and it was really kind of the first attempt to channel the discussion around degrowth to this how question. And as a result of this discussion, also a book has emerged, so something that we are currently working on and actually are close to finalizing. The tentative title is Degrowth and Strategy, How to Bring About Socio-Ecological Transformation. So it's been the initiative of Degrowth Vienna Group, and I have been happy to also join them in this effort. And then there kind of, we have been thinking in terms of, okay, how to discuss strategy in a way that speaks to degrowth and in a way that lives up to this multiplicity of degrowth. And the book that we are now completing, so it is very much, it includes voices from many people from the wider degrowth community, and it kind of consists in two parts. So in one, we try to theorize the discussion of strategy so far and also to move it forward. So, for example, there is the discussion of state in relation to strategy, or there is the discussion of issues of equity in relation to strategy. So kind of how to build strategy, which is context sensitive and which also allows for this plurality of degrowth. And also in part one of the book, many people who are part of the degrowth movement have been reflecting on degrowth as a movement and kind of the next steps for it in terms of, okay, should degrowth as a movement be more organized, or how we can organize in ways that are more kind of fruitful and can help us pursue degrowth in wider spaces. So, and then also in the second part of the book, we try to address specific areas. So, for example, the different provisioning areas, such as food, and then to think, okay, what kind of strategies from a degrowth stance would be important in relation to food, and then also to look at particular examples of specific initiatives and how they have pursued strategy. So there is also a chapter, say, on housing, where the activists based in Berlin were writing about this referendum that was organized there fairly recently on actually calling to to go against the big corporate housing companies and to socialize housing, and a referendum which has been won by the activists, and we are yet to see how it would proceed. So, in my own kind of chapter in this book, so I will not have the chance to go into a lot of detail, but some of us in Degrowth have been very much in dialogue with the ideas of late Erik Olin Wright in relation to strategy, and including myself. And then I have been trying to kind of articulate the different logics of transformation that Wright identifies, such as symbiotic, interstitial, and ruptural, and their role or potential role in degrowth as a movement. And this is something that's also kind of we're engaging with theoretically in the book. So, but this is only kind of a hint of the discussion, let's say, which is emerging, and which the first, let's say, big contribution of this discussion will be this book, which is coming out in spring, at some point in spring next year. And I think now it is a good moment for me to pause, and I look forward to the discussion with you all. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Katerina, for your presentation. So exciting and so interesting in this moment, especially in this moment with the COP26 Glasgow conference discussion about climatic change. So it was interesting, some discussion. I send the question, if the people, the audience of the YouTube channel want to make any kind of question in this moment. In any case, Victoria and I, maybe that we have some question for you in order to begin discussion in this moment. So, Victoria, si quieres hacer algún tipo de pregunta, está totalmente abierto. A la gente que está escuchándonos a través del canal YouTube, si queréis hacer algún tipo de cuestión o de pregunta, pues estaríamos encantados en recibirla, ¿no? Creo que hay una cuestión que ha puesto Victoria por el chat, ¿no? Que si thank you very much for your contribution to speak English, but it's sent from your opinion and your geographical location. Do you see the popular acceptance of the growth proposal? Are people really willing to decline?
Yes. Shall I start already addressing it, the question? Yeah, perfect. So thank you for this question. I would say that well, there is still the imaginary of growth is still very much present in our societies, and of course it depends like which kind of groups or people you are speaking with. But I would say that generally there is perhaps a more fertile soil today for ideas connected to the growth. So within the Swedish context, I can definitely see that there has been rising interest in the growth since we organized the conference, and perhaps then it was something quite surprising kind of to speak about, but now actually a lot of groups and people would be aware of it. So a lot of students are aware of the growth and are willing to have the growth addressed in the at the university level. So different movements would connect to the growth. So those engaged in climate activism, for example, they would kind of come across this issue. Okay, so what do we mean exactly by system change, and how does growth come in there, and how does capitalism come in there? So many would be curious about or even familiar with discussion on the growth. And maybe kind of not necessarily examples around Sweden, but when the pandemic came, so so on the one hand, of course, there was this discursive moment that some critics of degrowth would be saying, aha, this is what degrowth is about, actually, this is what you wanted. But hence it was also a lot of counter work for the degrowth movement to say, no, this is not what we are after. And the pandemic is very much one of the kind of consequences of, or one of the problems with growth, and with the kind of the biodiversity crisis, and with the big agriculture expanding, there is more pandemics are more likely to be happening. And this is also exactly what degrowth is kind of trying to bring the attention to. But then also during the pandemic unfolding, there have been, on the one hand, many examples of kind of mutual aid organizing to help each other out during this time, and a lot of kind of grassroots action to address the consequences, or the ongoing pandemic. And then also there have been some surveys. For example, in the UK, there was a kind of survey where people were asked what they would prioritize in this very hard situation, if it would be environment or economic growth or well-being. And basically the response was that environment and well-being, they are more important than economic growth. So, and of course, with surveys, it's always tricky because it really matters how the question is framed, and the answers are sometimes shaped by the very questions, but still it was a powerful kind of visualization that for many, even if growth is such a central discussion, but well-being is important, and not necessarily not the same as growth. And environment is also very important and is deteriorated by growth. So yes, and I would say that perhaps if you can say that there is no like wide popular support for degrowth currently, but it is there is more of it now. So it is, I would say, one of the directions also for degrowth as a movement to work on, to build this popular support, and to perhaps engage with the seeds of it that are already out there.
Okay, thank you, Katerina. I had some questions. So the first one is about, well, I hope to receive this, I hope to read in the future, for coming spring 2022, this book about the growth that you're preparing. So I will be very happy to read this, your book, because I consider it's a very important moment in order to decide how can we spread, how can we do grow the influence of the growth movement. So in many of our societies. So the first question is about sometimes when we're talking about the growth, we are focusing, and you said this before, we are focusing especially in some items. First one is about mobility. The second one is about food sovereignty, so ecological strategies, really. So maybe urban agriculture, maybe no urban. So no discussion this in this moment. So mobility, food sovereignty, agriculture, ecology, and maybe recycling. Recycle social attitudes, maybe. So sometimes when I explain to my students, I'm thinking about how can I explain to my students this question. Sometimes they say to me, well, yes, it's perfect, yes, about mobility, urban, the flights around the world, the ecological footprint of our way of life, with traveling around the world. But how can we go beyond these 3-4 items? So I'm thinking about the students, not thinking about my opinion. Say, how can we explain to the student that we are not focusing only on mobility, food 0 kilometer, or recycling waste, paper. So how can we explain this? Because sometimes you consider, I think they say in your book, in your forthcoming book, in strategies for practice, you are proposing solution from this discussion. But how can we explain this? How can we go beyond these 3-4 items that may be more visible for the people from not really the grow movement. No, people that we want to convince that they will participate in the grow movement, really. This is the first question, more question later.
Yeah. So I would say, I mean, the growth research has been now happening for more than a decade, but still it's so like the ambition, right, is to challenge everything and to reorganize societies and economies. And in that sense, everything has to be addressed from a degrowth stance. But then some issues have been addressed more than others. So, and also in many issues, kind of we as a research area and as a movement have only scratched the surface. So I would say that probably it is important to kind of visibilize the knowledge that already is out there, but that looks at issues which are perhaps beyond those three that you have mentioned. So say there is discussion on technology and degrowth. So there was an issue in the Journal of Cleaner Production some years ago, and it really was an important, I think, start of this discussion. And now there is a basis to kind of engage with that. Then some others are working. So some people would then look at, okay, what is, how do we speak of innovation beyond growth? So, or how do we engage with the kind of large and small scale technologies? This is something that partially also I'm trying to work on with so in my department, basic materials like paper, plastics, steel are very much researched, but they're really being produced by huge for-profit industries where the interests of capital and the interests of different states all often merge. And then, of course, this is really conspicuously absent in the growth discussion, because usually we do speak about kind of smaller scale initiatives and more kind of other kinds of organizations. So then also being connected to this discussion as a degrowth scholar then makes me think, okay, it's really important to try and interact with this topic from a degrowth stance. So I would say that, yes, so for those involved in degrowth scholarship, it is important to try and kind of expand our horizons. So, and then also to be aware of the different research that is out there and to bring it in. So to say, okay, degrowth is not only about food, even if it is a very, very important area, but also we can discuss housing in relation to degrowth. We can also, discuss technology. We can discuss work and care and rethinking of this on degrowth principles. So any kind of area of life, there is some already degrowth or degrowth related research to kind of connect to. So, and it's a matter of visibilizing and encouraging more of this research, I would say.
Oh, thank you. So this question for the future. And so 2 brief questions. So I think the brief, I'm not sure about it, will be brief questions. The first one is about COP26 Glasgow now. So what are your expectations, either expectations about the result of the COP? No? So really we are in a similar spectacle, in my opinion, maybe, from other summit, from other global conference in the previous year. We are seeing the castle with the governments, so with the leaders of the world, so having a discussion with a very greenwashing aptitude to the audience. We're seeing the people around the summit with a counter-hegemonic attitude, to the conference. So maybe there are 2 different worlds, not connected really, or maybe connected, or one world with afraid for the attitude of the people outside. What happens if the results of the COP Glasgow are not the expectations, the expectations of the people it's very possible that we are assistant to this conference. So at this question about your feeling about COP Glasgow, the other is about your presentation, where you're talking about the punishing the policy making. No? How can we push policy changes in European Union especially, but maybe for another day we can meet here, discussion the growth, not in European context, another context, okay? But it's another discussion, not today. So what are the strategies, what are the tools that we can more over the pressure, the social discussion, the social media, environmental education, maybe a part of this one. So what are the real ways for punishing in policy making just now in European Union context, in your opinion?
Yeah, thank you for these questions. So yeah, with COP26, I must say that I kind of so it's very similar to what you have expressed yourself, in the sense that, okay, there are these leaders and a lot of showcasing of some sort of rush to change things, while actually not really doing much in the end. And then also, the kind of counter-hegemonic movement pressure that is happening outside these spaces, but doesn't really change the decisions that are made there. So in a way, I have been kind of loosely only following it, probably because I have no faith, let's say, that this is something that will change things. And I think there was a book, I think by Siplet and colleagues, on kind of characterizing COP negotiations as this very active inaction. So a lot of talking, a lot of things happening regularly, but actually in the end only kind of very weak commitments from governments, and not pushing for stronger agenda. So I would be, of course, glad if kind of more drastic steps are made, but I don't see it in a way as a main space for transforming at least the climate policies. Of course, soon, there has been part of the IPCC report that has already come out, and then another parts of it will also be coming soon. So that will kind of be another step in provoking, further discussion, or pointing to the to urgency of addressing climate change. But yeah, so probably, let's see, but and I should catch up also on what has been happening in COP. But I can, it's really my kind of self-reflection that I have don't have much expectations from it. But I would be happy to be surprised, let's say. So, and when it comes to pushing policy making, so that is kind of tough, and I would say that, okay, this Green New Deal for Europe, for example, I think that it has been like a very nice set of policy. I don't agree with all the proposals there, but it's a good set, like a good basis for discussion, and definitely much more kind of radical and progressive than what the European Union is pushing now. So, but there it has been like a document that has been compiled by various groups. So there has been a lot of somehow coalition energies put into it, but then perhaps not enough to push it at the level of the European Union itself. So, and I think what is quite interesting, that the way the mainstream policy of European Union, the European Green Deal, so the way it has been framed is that they kind of respond there to the youth movement, to the youth on our streets, as they write. So they kind of frame it as a response to demands from the bottom up, but still they channel this very much into quite conventional policies, where the industry is in the driving seat, and which are very much about protecting the industry rather than changing things. Or okay, maybe there are some changes there, but they're only incremental. So then I have been kind of thinking, okay, what could be done? Because it's a pity that this Green New Deal for Europe has been kind of forgotten, even if there is still a campaign running around it within DiEM25. But then one of the interesting ideas within this Green New Deal for Europe has been that, okay, it shouldn't be this like master document again that is then implemented in different parts of Europe. So there should be also the more like bottom-up grassroots Green New Deals for Europe, which are being deliberated within the different local contexts, and then they can kind of push more municipal policies, and then they can join coalitions and push national policies, and then the grassroots coalitions can unite and push the European policies. So this is something we don't see now, but that's kind of the kind of grassroots coalition building of movements would be very interesting and very perhaps something that could gain power to push policies more. And from our like very limited local position and what we can do. So within our local degrowth group, we have now started thinking along those lines. Okay, how do we build a people's, let's say, Green New Deal for Malmo? And we think that, okay, this is a way to, Green New Deal is problematic as a framing in some ways, but then many people engaged in social movements can connect to this terminology. So maybe actually we can use this framing as a way to build coalitions within the movements that are already present in the space where we live and where we are active as a group. And together we can try to formulate, okay, what would be the kinds of things we would want to see for Malmo in relation to environment, in relation to welfare, to economy, and so on. So, and we are kind of at the start of this very bottom-up efforts, and we don't know how exactly they will unfold, but technically or ideally, it could be a nice process where the idea of thinking about what can be done in the context where the different movements operate can be a way to build a stronger coalition somehow, because also some of the researchers who have been working on topics around degrowth and studying movements have been pointing out that, okay, movements can be very much fighting a particular issue, such as climate change and bringing the attention to the need for systemic change, but maybe not having the space to think what exactly that systemic change would mean. So, or what exactly are the things we can demand as a movement, apart from more action from politicians. So yeah, perhaps kind of starting from the bottom up, which is very much in line with degrowth thinking, can be a way to build something solid. And but I don't know how it will unfold, because we're very much at the beginning of this efforts here with our local group. Maybe one more thing that I can say also is that some kind of people who have been writing on policies in relation to degrowth, like Tim Parikh, so he was saying that, okay, maybe also it could be strategic for degrowth as a movement or for some kind of voices within it to support particular policies in particular contexts. So like, and he calls it also, I think, Trojan horse policies, that there can be policies that can be used both by, well, it can be claimed by degrowthers, but it can also be fairly interesting for the more, let's say, neoliberal policymakers, say like a job guarantee, but then to try and have an emphasis of how this policy can be framed in a way that would open more potentialities for, let's say, degrowth and things compatible with degrowth. So that is like another way to think of policies and perhaps trying to support particular policies in particular contexts.
Oh, okay, thank you. Thank you, Katerina. I don't know if I have any question from the people for the audience. not in that moment. Well, so if there is any question more from Victoria, from the audience, I want to say thank you. Gracias.
Bueno, hola.
Victoria, hola.
Os he dejado un poco, solo quería agradecerle, sorry I don't speak very well English, quería agradecerte la participación en las jornadas y de verdad que ha sido un placer y además le has dado un carácter internacional a esto. Muchas gracias, Catherine.
Qué bien, muchas gracias. Mi placer también.
Igualmente.
Gracias, Victoria, por ser el punto de partida, ¿no? Victoria es el punto de partida de esta propuesta. Los demás estamos en
bueno, y gracias, Antonio, por haber asumido también la parte del peso, porque claro, en inglés era más complicado para mí. Pero sí, se sacan algunas cosas. Entre de esto lo tendré que volver a ver. Qué bueno que esto esté grabado. Qué bueno.
Sí, queda disponible en el canal de YouTube para toda la gente que lo quiera ver, ¿no? Y gracias. Gracias, Victoria, por poner en marcha esto. Gracias, Caterina, por haber estado hoy aquí. And see you soon in Granada.
Sí, muchas gracias por la invitación y estamos en contacto.
Estamos en contacto. Gracias, Caterina, y
gracias,
nos vemos
Caterina.
pronto. Gracias, chao, hasta luego.
Chao.